Let's talk a little bit about e-scooters now on the show. And parents are being warned they could get the blame if their child is caught using one of these e-scooters. This is from the Safer Essex Roads Partnership, and we'll be hearing from them after 8 on BBC Essex. They say the vehicle could be seized by police and it could result in parents getting a hefty fine and points on their licence if they buy their children some of these e-scooters. Well, joining me now is motoring lawyer Nick Freeman, aka Mr. Loophole. Morning to you, Nick.
Good morning, Sonia.
Morning. So how can parents get into trouble for something their children do when it comes to something like e-scooters then?
Well, permitting use or aiding and abetting. So basically, e-scooters are illegal unless they're being used on private land. And I think what's happening is as term starts, some parents think, well, there's a lot of traffic, a lot of congestion, so I'm going to buy a little John or Jane an e-scooter and it'll make it an easy, efficient way of getting to school, and they don't realise they're actually doing something seriously wrong. So first of all, you can't use an e-scooter legally on public roads. So that there is nobody that can use a private e-scooter on a public road, on pavements, in parks or anywhere like that. They can only be used on private land. The schemes that are legal are for people, the hire schemes operated by Voix, and they relate to people who are over 18 and they have a driving licence, a valid driving licence. And it's to give it a sense of perspective, they are actually regarded in law as the same as a moped. So that means you have to have insurance, you have to have number plates, you would have to have indicators. So to answer your question, if you buy an e-scooter for your child to go to school, you would be aiding and abetting their offence. So they would have, for example, no insurance, so you'd get between 6 and 8 penalty points. That will be in addition to any points you might or might not have on your licence. So that could give you an immediate disqualification under the totting up provisions if there isn't exceptional hardship. If your child was involved in a serious offence, you could be regarded as aiding and abetting that offence. And the penalty that flows from that, if for example, you know that your child is taking drugs or drinking and you're allowing them to ride an e-scooter illegally on the road in that state, you will be aiding and abetting their drink driving or their drug driving. And there will be a mandatory period of disqualification that follows in relation to you as well. So, and there are other things to bear in mind. The e-scooters, which cost a lot of money, it will be seized, it will be destroyed by the police, you lose your money. You'd also get at best a heavy fine and penalty points. So it's a no-go area. But can I just point out an anomaly? And I don't wish to draw to your listeners' attention anything that's dangerous, but the anomaly is it is perfectly legal for children over the age of 14 to use an e-bike as long as they are proficient, etc., etc. And e-scooters tend to be limited to 12.5 or 15.5 miles an hour. Your 14-year-old child can go legally on an e-bike at 25 miles an hour. So, and an e-bike arguably is much more dangerous than an e-scooter because it's much heavier and will do a lot more damage. I'm not suggesting that that's what parents should purchase for their children, but it's if any government ministers are listening, it's an anomaly that they need to get hold of and sort out for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and it's as you've pointed that out, really interesting, but also the fact that as you've said, you can go and buy one of these private e-scooters quite easily. There's nothing to stop you buying it, but you can't use it. And that in itself seems a little mad. Well, you can if you live on a massive property with loads of land, It's your own land, but most people don't.
If you've got hundreds of acres on your estates, you can e-scoot away very happily, and you can have your friends round and do the same thing. But maybe the government should be looking at manufacturers and saying, making them exercise reasonable diligence. Where are you going to use this? How are you going to use it? And then they're not allowed to sell it. And the other point is many e-scooters are modified. I was in London not long ago, driving out of London on the A12, and I was overtaken by an e-scooter doing about 70 miles an hour. It was about 30 miles out of London. Maybe it wasn't the A12, I think it was. But it was doing about 70 miles an hour. And the guy wasn't wearing a helmet and it had tiny wheels. So, I know that's a different argument, but they're fraught with danger. And the problem is there's no number plate, there's no means of identifying them. And they are illegal. So, we need a vigilant campaign by the police to literally stop any private e-scooter and seize them and then deal with them accordingly. And I think then people will be discouraged from using them because of the obvious financial penalty, the immediate financial penalty of losing your e-scooter.
Yeah, so that sort of led me on to my next point, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but any thoughts welcome on it. In terms of the e-scooters, and it's all well and good saying, don't do this, you could lose your licence. But what is the reality in terms of that actually happening? I mean, you've outlined how it can happen, but does it actually happen? Because it relies on the police, catching these people in the act and all of that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does happen, but not nearly enough. And that goes back to the problem that you're aware of, the resource problem, the lack of police presence on our streets. We're reliant now, really, aren't we, on almost robotical speeding in terms of controlling road traffic matters. We don't really see officers on the street. Occasionally, they say we're going to have a day where we're going to deal with e-scooters, and anyone listening will think, fine, I'm not going to take mine out today. But during most of the time, the chances are that unless you're involved in a serious incident and are detained at the scene or fall off and are detained by members of the public, you ride with anonymity and impunity. And that's a really sad state of affairs. So you have laws which are largely impotent. And it's not as if, with a car, at least you have a number plate, you have a system in situ whereby you can trace the owner. With an e-scooter or an e-bike, there's no such system. So what you have is a video of someone driving really dangerously, really irresponsibly. But do you take it any further than that? Well, how do you? Because there's no form of connecting the driving with the rider or the registered keeper. So there's no simple solution. I think they are basically a good idea if they're used responsibly and legally. But when they're used largely illegally, and most of them are used illegally, and they're used for committing criminal offences, particularly in London, snatches, stuff like that, or just people who think, certainly in Manchester where I am at the moment, I'm here in Manchester today, you see them whizzing around on the pavement, not stopping at red lights, going through give way junctions without stopping stop junctions, and there's nobody there to enforce it. And, if you're a pedestrian crossing the road or walking on the pavement, you've got to have your wits about you, because they're very, very silent and they can cause serious damage if they hit you. And the chances are, if they hit you, they're not going to stop.
Yeah, and we've spoken about, some of those accidents that have happened here in Essex in the past as well. Nick, really interesting stuff. Thank you for joining us this morning. That is the motoring lawyer, Nick Freeman, talking about this story. Parents